Last but definitely not least is the sacrament of service, which is the sacrament of matrimony, aka marriage. What's the purpose of marriage? Well, marriage is something that has been around for a while, and there's a lot of even just common sense reasons to understand marriage that no one would want to go through life alone, that we naturally seek companionship, we naturally seek intimacy with other people and have romantic feelings towards others. And it naturally is kind of this thing that we want to give ourselves to other people, that you want to spend the rest of your life with someone who you love. If you love someone, you naturally want to be with them forever. So there is that natural level that we don't even really need to see theology to understand why marriage is important. But what God has done is taken this natural desire to be with that person you love forever and elevated it into a sacrament. And this vocation of marriage, like we said, is written into the very nature of man and woman. We see in Genesis 2, if you remember reading this passage earlier in the year, that Adam, there's all these different people who are, or sorry, different kinds of beings that are created as a helpmate, and Adam still feels alone. And the Lord agrees it's not good for the man to be alone, that he wants to make a helper suited to him. And when we say suited to him, not the animals, that our companion is not meant to be an animal or something like that. Pets can serve a good role in our life and be there with us along the way, but we naturally desire the companionship of other people, specifically in the area of romance and wanting to spend the rest of our life with someone in that sense. But this sacrament is obviously hurt by sin because we see it that story ends of this. We have Adam and Eve and they come together and they're in perfect relationship with one another. But when they sin, they cover themselves out of shame. We see that there's a power struggle that's going to exist in the relationship and discord, meaning conflict. And in the Old Testament, we see that marriage is a lot of man-made contracts, and you see that polygamy and divorce become the norm. All you have to do is read the Old Testament to see that original sin causes marriage to be seen as more of a contract, which we'll get into in just a minute. Polygamy becomes a norm and also divorce, all things that we'll address. But today in the Catholic Church, we see marriage as a covenant. And in the Old Testament, we can kind of see that the people, the Israelites, are not faithful to God. And that when they start to worship false gods, that they start to get brought into ideas of the false gods, which are things like sexual immorality and divorce and polygamy and all those kind of things that as they stray away from God, these other things start to stray into their marriages too. This idea of polygamy is just the idea of having more than one wife or husband at the same time. Let me bring up just a really short question that relates to everything that we're talking about here. That the status quo in our society today is that when you get together with someone, you maybe date for a period of time, and then you live together. Like you get an apartment or a house together, and then maybe you look towards engagement and marriage in the future. The church is very adamant that this is not the right way to go about things. And you might be like, well, why? It kind of makes a lot of sense. Like we can save money, we can get to know each other before we kind of make those big commitments. But what the church says is that this is not, you're sabotaging your marriage before it begins. You're probably like, well, why? Well, first of all, let me just start with the data that it does often, the statistics say, lead to a higher rate of divorce. And it says that it can lead to marital instability than those who wait until after being engaged or married to live together. Why do people want to do this? Well, often they want to be steady with one another. They want to lower their rent. They want to have sexual availability, leading to kind of sex before marriage. But what happens is that it kind of leads to this mentality that we're going to try this out before we get married. Well, if you go into it with that mentality, like people always say, oh, well, you need to test drive. Well, maybe that's true of a car, but we're not going to treat people like we treat purchases and cars. We have to realize that marriage is a very serious commitment. And that when we kind of go into those things too early, that we're not allowing what that sacrament wants to give us to influence our relationship with that person. That we need to wait until we're given the graces and the sacrament of marriage and then kind of begin to have intimacy and other things with one another. And what we see here is that marriage shifts from a contract mentality to a covenant. Remember that a contract is something that's conditional. I hire you, I'm going to pay you $100 to cut my lawn today. If I don't have the $100, you don't cut the lawn. If you don't cut the lawn, you don't get the $100. That's a contract. But a covenant is something that's unconditional, that even when the other person doesn't hold up their point of view, that you still hold yours. And marriage is not meant to be 50-50. It's 100-100. Even just a simple thing that happened. So at the time of making this, I have a 2-year-old son, and my wife and I, with putting the baby to bed, usually take different shifts. Like, okay, you take a night, then I take a night. Well, a night came up last night at the time of making this that my wife wasn't feeling well. It was her night to put the baby to bed, but I did it because it's not 50-50. Like, if she's not feeling well, I can obviously help and do a little bit more on my part. But if this was a contract mentality, you'd be like, hey, well, you have to hold up your end. But that's not what marriage is all about. What Jesus has done is raise marriage back up to a covenant and a sacrament status. Jesus said in Matthew 19, what God has joined together, no human being could separate. So if your marriage has been joined together by God, that no human being should separate it. And we'll talk about all these different kinds of issues in class a little bit more. St. Paul even compares matrimony with the love that Jesus has for the church. How does Jesus love the church? Like a covenant, unconditional, with all of his being. And that's how we're called to love in marriage as well. Interestingly enough, the bride and the groom are the ministers of the sacrament of marriage. You have a witness who is a deacon or a priest, but the bride and the groom are the ministers of this sacrament. There are two parts of the matter, or kind of the things that need to happen to make a marriage. First of all is the vows, what we call mutual consent, that both people have agreed to these vows, and that's through saying their words. This is why in the Catholic Church you're not allowed to write your own vows, because what we want you to do is to say these words that are really strong, that show your commitment. Next thing is kind of an interesting concept that people are definitely going to find a little bit weird. But if you are joining yourselves together, that you have to physically join yourselves together to be considered married through consummation, which is basically just having sex with the person. That your marriage is not considered complete until you've what we call consummated the marriage, meaning that you need to have sexual intercourse with the person. And once that happens, that the marriage is unbreakable. But if you had not consummated a marriage, that it is not considered a complete marriage at that point. And the form is that exchange of the vows. So God's plan for matrimony is basically these 5 things here. First of all, that you become one, that you unite to one another. And that sexual bond that you share in which you become one flesh is meant to symbolize the oneness that you're becoming. So you always need to keep in mind that unitive process or purpose of human sexuality, that sex should be unity. It should bring unity to the people. Hookup culture today fails to do that. It makes sex transactional or all about pleasure. It's not about bringing people together to be united. Also, things like in vitro fertilization and like lab practices that take away the unity aspect of sex. Second, that sex should always be procreative, that all sexual acts in the Catholic Church need to be open to life. We're going to discuss these things in class, but you always need to be open to children, that every individual sexual act must be open to life. What are the promises in a Catholic marriage? First of all, indissolubility, which means we don't believe in divorce and remarriage. If there is a reason that you need to get divorced for your own safety's sake, that's one thing. And you would be able to be divorced, but you'd be asked not to remarry so that you stay faithful to that person that you've made a vow to. Faithfulness, no cheating. People ask all the time, is watching porn cheating? Absolutely, it is. You need to keep your heart completely united on only that person. Being extra friendly and intending to have an emotional affair at work, is that cheating? Yes, absolutely. Any intentional act on your part to step outside of your marriage is cheating. If you are tempted to and you say no to the temptation, that's different. Like, okay, you find a woman attractive at work, but you don't act on it. No, that's not cheating. But when you act on it, yes, of course it is. You have to keep your heart committed to that person. And you need to promise to be open to life, that you need to be open to children in your marriage. So just like love changes water to wine through the wedding feast at Cana, what agape, we've talked about the four loves in this class, the sacrificial love turns natural loves with this grace of the sacrament into God's love for the church. It should become selfless and sacrificial and be a life-giving love that gives life to your children, to the people around you. And that eros, that romantic or desire love and friendship love, is enhanced, not replaced. That the love that you have with the graces of the sacrament will grow, not be replaced.